Hello, everyone. I wanted to first welcome everyone to the first of our webinar series, The Value and Impact of Humane Education. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today from your respective areas of the world. We're very happy to be having you join us, and we hope that you're all doing well and staying safe during these difficult times of COVID. My name is Sabrina Sabai. I'm the director of Join Hands, and we're all really excited to be hosting this webinar here for you today, and thank you for joining us. These webinars are being held as a part of our Caring for Life education program in Pakistan. And this program is being done in collaboration and partnership with the Government of Sindh Education Foundation. And it will be delivered in 50 primary schools in the Sindh province in just the first year of our 3-year pilot program, with a goal to expand to hundreds of schools by the end of our pilot, reaching thousands of children across the Sindh province. So needless to say, we're all very excited about this program. To provide some background for those of our guests who are joining us today who are not familiar with the program, allow me to give you a little bit of an introduction to Caring for Life education, also known as CFL. CFL education teaches children in primary school to treat people, animals, and the environment with respect and compassion. The goal is to help children develop better character, to develop character and virtue, and to enhance civic harmony. It's based on the United Nations UNESCO 4 Pillars of Education, and it complements the aims of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, that are part of a global agreement, which is to transform our world for the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. With that in mind, we're very fortunate to have a speaker who's joining us today who will be able to speak to us about the SDGs and specifically how CFL aligns with those global goals that have been set forth by the UN. The webinar series is geared towards the Sindh Education Foundation Master Trainers who will be instrumental in training educators in Sindh on the principles of CFL education and how to deliver it in classrooms. So I would like to specifically welcome all of the master trainers to the webinar today and thank you for your inspiring commitment to this groundbreaking program and for its successful future. Again, for those guests that are joining us, you'll notice on your screen that we have a number of different groups joining us from different locations in the Sindh province. Those individuals that you see before you on those windows are the SEF master trainers. So we'll give a wave, everyone, to all of our guests who are watching here today. Welcome to the trainers and welcome to all of our guests. We will have 2 speakers today during our webinar, and they will be discussing issues about humane education and about animal and environmental welfare. Following their presentations, we will have a 20 to 30-minute question and answer session where you may share your questions to the speakers in the Q&A feature on Zoom. We'll do our very best to address everybody's questions as we are able to in the time that we have. Please do keep in mind that while we do have a moderator for the Q&A section on Zoom, we will be leaving the bulk of the questions until we do the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if your question on the Q&A format on Zoom does not get answered right away, just keep in mind that that's probably why, that we haven't lost it or ignored it, but we're just saving it until the Q&A session. So before we get to our presentations, I would like to invite the Director of Programs and Planning for the Sindh Education Foundation, Ms. Sadaf Anis, to say a few words on behalf of SEF. So I'll pass it over to you, Sadaf.
Thank you, Sabrina. Dear speakers, Jessica and Harry, our partners, Sabrina, Ms. Joy, SCF officials, master trainers, good evening. Though I understand it may be good morning for some of you. On behalf of the Managing Directors in the Education Foundation, I welcome you to this forum. Let me briefly introduce you to Sindh Education Foundation, though actually Sabrina spoke a little bit about it. The Sindh Education Foundation was established under the Sindh Foundation Act 1992 as a semi-autonomous organization, and we are working for the government of Sindh with the mandate to support education in the province through diverse interventions. The Act provides wide-ranging powers to the foundation to support education sector through a large number of initiatives. And CFL curriculum is one of such excellent initiatives. which was scheduled to be launched in 2020, but unfortunately due to COVID, we requested to get it rescheduled for the next academic year. So inshallah, we will start launching it in the next academic year. It was during COVID-19 lockdown in May that we reached out to Ms. Sabrina to request to conduct some online capacity training webinars for our master trainers. And we believe in sharing of a safe sharing the safe environment among human beings, animals, and all living things, and wish to do whatever we can to ensure the same. I guess it was after a few meetings with Ms. Sabrina and Ms. Joy that we came to the conclusion that it would be very useful if we could have some international speakers who could conduct sessions with them. And we are really, really grateful to join hands, and especially Ms. Sabrina, that they managed to arrange these sessions for us. And we are hopeful that these sessions will add value to knowledge of our team on humane education. And I cannot emphasize enough how humane education is actually so very essential to the transformative experience we look forward our children will get through this. So in the end, I would like to thank again everyone for joining here and giving their time. Thank you very much, Sabrina. Over to you.
Thank you, Sadaf. Thank you to you and to Mr. Kazi, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us today, who is the Managing Director of the Sindh Education Foundation. We're very grateful to the entire team and the managing team. Myself, selfishly, I'm very grateful to Ms. Shapara Rizvi, who's been monumental in this as well. So I think that without the team at SEF, this program would not have been possible in Pakistan, but in their very capable hands, I think it will flourish, and we're very hopeful for its positive future. So let's get ready for our first speaker. Before we begin today, our speakers shared with us 5 survey questions that we would present to the master trainers and to all of you attendees today about their session topics. Because CFL is based on inquiry-based learning methods, we wanted to do what we were able to do in a webinar format to keep things as interactive and engaging as possible. So we thought what we would do is share those questions with everybody today and provide an opportunity for you to to visually showcase your responses. So what I'd like to ask of the master trainers is to reach into your conference booklets and pull out your red and green cards that were provided to you. And what we'll do is we will ask the survey questions, and in response, please hold up your red or green card nice and high for our presenters to see your responses. So let's get going with the first question. Education is one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. True, green card, false, red card. A lot of greens. Second question. Animal welfare is specifically addressed in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. True, green, or false, red? A lot of green. And just so you know, I'm going to leave it to our presenter to address the answers for this. Third, animal welfare is critical to the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Green, true, red, false. Mix. Next, has Pakistan reported its progress on the SDGs to the United Nations? Yes, green, no, red. Also a mix. Okay, and last one. Achievement of the SDGs depends on action at the local or the national level. Green for true, red for false. Pretty uniform there, all green. Okay, so thank you everyone for sharing your responses. And the main reason that we pose these 2 questions, well, we have 2 reasons. One is that we want you to start thinking about the content that the presenters are going to share with you, just so that you have a background understanding in what your own perceptions and understandings are. but we also want to make sure that the speakers can see what your responses are, so they also understand what those perceptions are, so they can speak to that in their presentation. So without further ado, let us welcome our first presenter, Jessica. So we'll get Jessica to turn on her camera here. Hello, Jessica. Let me give you a brief introduction to Jessica. So Jessica Bridgers is the Executive Director at World Animal Net. She combines a scientific background with a passion for animal protection and has been advocating for the inclusion of animals in sustainable development since 2017. Key to this is bringing more voices for animals to the table. She also works on advancing the welfare of animals at UN Environment, at the World Bank, and the World Organization for Animal Health. She holds a Master's of Science in Animals and Public Policy and a Bachelor of Science in Biology. With this impressive background, I think that we are in for a very informative and interesting presentation. So please welcome Jessica with me. And Jessica, we pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sabrina, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here with everyone today. So let me just share my screen. And hopefully you can see it. Can you see my screen, Sabrina?
Yes, it looks
okay.
All good.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be here today because the project and work that you all are embarking on is really exciting, and I think holds so much opportunity for helping create a better future, not just in Pakistan, but really with global implications. So yeah, excited to be here. So I'll be talking to you about the Sustainable Development Goals and how they relate to caring for life education, and how caring for life education can help in the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I guess just as to get started, it would be helpful for me to kind of see a show of hands how many of you have already heard of the Sustainable Development Goals before today. And how many, yeah. So I don't know, maybe just to raise your hand if you've heard of the SDGs before. Great, okay, so we have a few. So my goal for today is to help you understand the context of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And yeah, in terms of how they were developed and what they aim to do, and who is responsible for implementing them, and how, what does implementation look like? And then we're going to explore how the SDGs relate to humans, animals, and the planet. And then I just want to demonstrate how caring for life education and humane education can really accelerate Pakistan's implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So throughout the presentation, if you just kind of keep in the back of your head how you can use caring for life education to drive progress on the Sustainable Development Goals in Pakistan. So the Sustainable Development Goals are the main global policy process guiding sustainable development. And sustainable development just means that the work we're doing in development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet its own needs. So we're making sure that the well-being of everyone on the planet today is taken care of, and also future generations. So it has a long-term outlook. And the purpose is to address the major global challenges that we face. So poverty, food security, inequality, environmental challenges, and peace and justice. So there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They're often just called the SDGs. And the SDGs were negotiated and agreed by the United Nations in 2015. And they replace what was a previous development paradigm called the Millennium Development Goals, which spanned from 2000 to 2015. So in about 2012, member states began negotiating what the next sustainable development paradigm would look like. And in 2015, what we got was the Sustainable Development Goals. And these goals will also run for 15 years, and so they'll expire in 2030. So all of the goals are meant to be achieved by that time. You might also see this SDG is called the Sustainable Development Agenda, or Agenda 2030. Those are used really interchangeably. So the Sustainable Development Goals cover a lot of issues that pertain to human well-being and environmental well-being. They don't explicitly include animals. However, the founding document for the SDGs does have the following quote. So it says, "We envisage a world in which humanity lives in harmony with nature and in which wildlife and other living species are protected." So I think that's a really nice complement to the goals of caring for life education, and really sets a frame which we can work within, trying to link human and animal and environmental well-being. So the SDGs are unique compared to their predecessors, the Millennium Development Goals, because they apply to all UN member states. So if you're a member of the UN, if your country is a member of the UN, they are bound to try to implement the SDGs. Unfortunately, the SDGs aren't, there's not a mechanism to enforce their implementation, but to motivate countries to progress implementation, countries are meant to voluntarily report their progress periodically at the UN. One thing that's nice about it not being enforced and still applying to all member states is that countries can't opt out. So I guess a very prominent example of countries opting out more recently is with the Paris Climate Agreement and the US opting to leave, although we hopefully will be returning soon. So yeah, so it's really important in that respect that all member states are obligated to implement the SDGs. So yeah, it's a very universal program in that respect. And each SDG is made up of the goal, and then each goal has targets and indicators. So for example, there's a goal on education, and one of the targets is that all girls and boys receive primary and secondary education. So the targets really make more concrete and specific achievements for each goal. And then indicators are statistics that are meant to measure progress on achieving each target. So like I said, each country has voluntary reporting opportunities. And so the reporting takes place once a year in July at the UN. And usually there's about 40 to 50 countries that will give a report in any given year. And Pakistan did report its progress on the SDGs to the UN in 2019. So just last year in July, and you can find Pakistan's report on the internet on the UN website. So if anyone is interested in that, I can share the link later. So instead of reading through each of the SDGs, I thought I would share this video from the UN with you so that you can have a quick overview of what the different goals cover. So that was hopefully a helpful overview of the SDGs and what they cover. And I just want to highlight that the SDGs are a unique structure that the UN has developed, because typically the UN either deals with human rights issues or they'll deal with environmental issues, for example, with UN Environment, but sometimes there's not a lot of overlap between these, even though they are very important to each other. So it's really unique in that it bridges the gap between environmental and human well-being. So I just thought that I would go through in a bit more detail to try to kind of give examples of the linkages between humans, animals, and the environment within the SDGs. So these are the most obvious linkages between the SDGs and human well-being. So we have poverty, food security, health, education, gender equality, decent work. And I think one of the ones that I want to highlight that to me is most important is responsible consumption and production. So this really, I think, ripples out into environmental and animal issues, perhaps more than some of the other ones, but I just want to highlight that that one is really important. And then peace, justice, and strong institutions. So ensuring that we have good governance and policies and are able to enforce those. So these are all really straightforward, I think. In terms of the environment SDGs, so some of these are more straightforward than others. Protecting aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems through SDG 14 and SDG 15, pretty self-explanatory. With climate action, also very, very self-explanatory. I think with health, maybe this is something that is becoming more understood in the context of COVID. And also just if your environment, if you are experiencing a lot of pollution in your environment, that impacts your health. So I think this is a link that is sometimes overlooked, but I think gaining more prominence. And with the animals, I'll spend a bit more time on these. And just to say again that I've kind of extracted a subset of SDGs that are really obviously linked to animals, but that in reality you could find linkages between animals and all of the SDGs, or the environment and all of the SDGs. But yeah, so ensuring that animals' well-being is taken care of can help in a lot of ways for the SDGs. So there are millions of smallholders across the world that are relying on their animals for their livelihoods and well-being, and if the animals that they're caring for are not having a good welfare, then that can impact negatively on the people who are caring for them and ensuring their livelihoods and everything. So that impacts poverty, zero hunger through SDGs 1 and 2. With health and well-being, like we've seen with COVID, if we're not taking care of animal well-being and animal health, then that can come back in the form of zoonotic diseases that impact us and our economies. It also, for example, antibiotic resistance, antibiotic resistance can also have big implications for us, obviously, and we drive a lot of the resistance through our treatment of animals and using antibiotics prophylactically to prevent disease in animals that we are producing. With education, clearly, if we're not teaching people about animal sentience and the suffering that animals can suffer, it won't be seen as something that's important and that people feel they have an obligation to look out for. And that's similar to with the environment too. If we're not helping people understand the importance of a healthy environment and ecosystems, then those things might not be protected. And then again, sustainable consumption and production. If people don't understand the impacts of various production practices or their own consumption patterns, then these can have ripple effects across the environment and human welfare as well. And obviously the way that animals are industrially produced for food can have big implications for the environment. in terms of pollution and resource use. So this is a really important one related to animals. And then climate change for similar reasons. The production of animals industrially for food can contribute to climate change. And then also climate change is going to have an impact on animal well-being for both domestic and wild animals. Life below water and life above land, on land. Those are, again, very self-explanatory. And then we have, again, peace, justice, and strong institutions. So ensuring that we have good policies that protect animal welfare and environmental issues, and that we're able to enforce those. So yeah, again, I just want to emphasize that I wanted to pull out some of the key, really obvious linkages to kind of illustrate for you how the environment, animals, and humans are related to the SDGs, but in reality, all of those SDGs can relate to these issues. So please don't look at it as like there's a subset of each SDGs or each issue that can be described to only so many SDGs. They're really, interlinkages are key. And for example, if you're not making progress on SDG 15, so protecting terrestrial ecosystems, that's going to begin to ripple across other SDGs. So as we lose biodiversity, it impacts our food production through pollination, for example, of crops. And so, yeah, then that begins to affect livelihoods. And so it really, all of these things are very connected. And I think that's what makes the SDGs really unique and beautiful, is that they, yeah, it's looking at things through a very holistic lens. And in addition, implementation of the SDGs, even though it's a global paradigm, it really can't be achieved unless implementation is taking place at the local level or the national level. And so it's really important that that people recognize their own power to change things locally, and that will actually ripple to up to the global level. And because implementation locally is people driven, it's really critical that we have education that helps people see the I guess problems that their communities are facing, and can help identify solutions to those problems and then implement them. So I just wanted to take a closer look at SDG 4. So there is one target within SDG 4 that focuses on ensuring that learners are able to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development. So I think this is something that really links to what you're doing through this program, and through implementing a Caring for Life education at so many schools. So really helping people understand the linkages between humans, animals, and the environment, and then how those things can contribute to the SDGs. So just to kind of revisit Caring for Life, which you're very familiar with, of course, but learning to respect all people, animals, and the environment, and that students acquire the skills needed to realize their personal empathetic potential. So I think Caring for Life education is really well aligned to the SDGs. And so through CFL, we can create more engaged, empathetic citizens who recognize these interlinkages between animals, the environment, and humans, and the importance of caring for each other and for animals and the environment. That's going to go a long ways towards helping the achievement of the SDGs and solving the problems that are being faced. So yeah, in conclusion, the SDGs are really our global guide to solving the world's most pressing problems by encouraging implementation at the local and national level. They're really interlinked, and they cover human, environmental, and animal issues. And I think Caring for Life and humane education is a really fundamental need for moving these issues forward and increasing our ability to address the problems that we're facing globally and then at the local level. So yeah, I think it's really fundamental and important what this program is doing. And so I hope that this has helped kind of link what you're doing to the global agenda and the importance of, yeah, of changing human behavior and values, and helping to improve action at the local level. So with that, I will end my presentation, and I hope that, yeah, that was useful for you to have that overview.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I think it's really quite remarkable to see what kind of efforts are being made around the world to contribute to these global goals and to improve our world. And I think it's particularly exciting to make sure that everyone here understands what kind of contribution that they're making through CFL education and through being a part of this program to being a part of the achievement of the SDGs. So I think it's, and given the fact that CFL is also based on the UN's 4 pillars of education, I think it's particularly relevant. So thank you for sharing information about that. Moving, just to remind everyone that if you do have any questions with regards to Jessica's presentation, please do share them with your moderator, and we will get to those during the Q&A session later. Moving on, our next presenter will be covering content related to animal and environmental welfare and the role that human beings play in that. I had the pleasure of meeting and attending a presentation by Harry Eckman in Nepal in 2017. And since then, I've continued to watch him be incredibly influential in the animal welfare field. So before I introduce Harry and pass it over to him, I'd like to address Harry's 5 survey questions to you all first. So if you could once again grab your red and green cards from your brochures, we will go through Harry's questions. So first question, would you describe the way in which you make choices as mostly with your head, green, or with your heart, red? So hold those cards up nice and high so we can see them. So I'll repeat the question because I think there's maybe it didn't hear. So would you describe the way in which you make choices as mostly with your head, green, or with your heart, red? Okay, next question. When you make certain choices, do you consider the positive or negative impact they will have on animals and the environment? Green, yes. Red, no. Great. Does that positive or negative impact affect the choice that you ultimately make? Yes, green. Red, no. Do you sometimes feel like the choices you make are influenced by other people? Green, yes. Red, no. And last question, can you remember an example of a choice you made in your past that you might make differently now because of something you learned, saw, or experienced that changed your understanding or perspective? Green, yes. Red, no. So I see some very emphatic green waves there. So thank you to all the trainers for answering those questions. Keeping your responses in mind, let's get to welcoming our next speaker. Harry Eckman is an international animal welfare specialist with over 20 years experience. He is the co-founder and CEO of Change for Animals Foundation, a consultant for the International Fund for Animal Welfare and Human Behavior Change for Animals, and co-creator and co-host of the Animal Chat podcast. And for those of you who, if you have not heard it yet, I very highly recommend you take a listen to that podcast. It's very funny and very informative. And he has a lot of different speakers from all over the animal welfare field. Harry works with hundreds of locally based animal welfare and protection organizations around the world, providing them with guidance on strategic thinking, planning, and capacity development. His work also includes directing humane dog and cat population management projects, lobbying to end wildlife in captivity and the illegal wildlife trade, campaigning to end the dog and cat meat trades, integrating animals into disaster response preparedness plans, incorporating human behavior change concepts into animal welfare and management programs, and improving welfare standards in shelters and veterinary facilities. So clearly he's very experienced, and I have no doubt we're going to learn a lot during his presentation. So Harry, I will pass it on over to you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. Thank you everyone out there on different screens for joining and attending. The work you're doing is incredible, and I'm really honored to be here today to speak to all of you. I'm going to share my screen now. Let's hope this works. Has that worked? Great. So I'm going to talk to you today about human behavior change and its impact on animals and the environment. And this obviously touches on Jessica's presentation and the SDGs, as you'll see as I go through. And obviously, when we talk about human behavior change, the work that you're doing is an integral part of that. And so what I'll be talking about today are some of the general principles of human behavior change, some of which I'm sure you're well aware of, but I'm hoping that I'll provide you with different ways perhaps of thinking about it that could help as we try and improve the world for animals and for the environment. And so when we think about animal welfare and environmental issues, we often try and focus on trying to solve the symptoms of the problem that we see, the things that result from those problems, rather than looking a little bit deeper at the root causes of those problems. And human behavior is the root cause of most animal welfare and environmental problems and issues. So to address those issues and to solve them and to have the greatest impact, we need to understand the human behaviors that cause them, how and why people do what they do. And we need to look at what drives people to change their behavior. And so to put this into some kind of context, let's begin by looking at some of the issues that we mean, some of the issues I'm talking about. If we're talking about numbers, then the first thing that we need to consider with animals is those that are reared for food by the farming industry. And that's about 80 billion animals every year. That's land animals. Fish and animals in the ocean is far, far more, trillions we're talking about. But if we talk about land animals, then that's 80 billion a year. And 2 out of every 3 of those animals is factory or industrially farmed. So that's a huge number. Or we could consider the 300 million animals that are used around the world that people rely on for their livelihood. So these are working equines, horses and donkeys and mules. And these form a significant part of so many people's lives and livelihoods, and they rely on them immeasurably. But obviously, we also need to remember that animals aren't just used for food or for work. 1 million of them are also used to entertain us in zoos and aquariums and circuses and exhibitions. And even those that we don't use in some way still often suffer as a result of what people do. So millions of them are victims of cruelty and abuse. And of course, the impact goes beyond our direct actions, the things that we do to animals or use animals for in regards to food or for work. When we look at issues like deforestation and land use, then that kills and displaces millions of other animals, and it decimates biodiversity and ecosystems and has a dramatic effect on the environment. And so 42 million acres of forest in Asia, Africa, and Latin America are destroyed each year, and that has an effect on countless animals. And then there's those voiceless animals, the ones that quietly live alongside us on the streets or in neighborhoods, and they still suffer as a result of our neglect and our ignorance about them and the way in which we treat them. Whichever way you look at it, it really sucks being an animal a lot of the time. So, but we're not here today to just dwell on everything that's wrong. well, that's not the point of this presentation, obviously. Instead, we're here to explore and develop solutions to these complex issues that face animals and the environment by looking at the group that has the greatest impact on them, and that's us. Because, as I said, while human behavior is the root cause of most animal welfare and environmental issues, it's also the solution. And so the first thing I want to think about when we look at human behavior in general is that the secrets to changing behavior isn't so much about understanding what it is that we do, what we do to animals, what we do to the environment, but why we do it. And the why is different for everyone. As you held up your cards there, the green and the reds in answer to those questions, every one of you were reflecting on a different circumstance or a different thing or a different memory that has informed whatever decision you made as to whether it was green or red. Everybody is different. Why do we or should we care about the welfare of animals is going to be different for everyone. But with so many different animal welfare issues to consider, the first few slides obviously demonstrated there's a lot of different things that we could talk about. I'm just going to pick one to focus on and just explore a few ideas in regards to human behavior and the choices that we make in relation to those animals. And so I'm going to talk about food choices for the next couple of slides. And if we consider our food choices, it's an issue that affects animal welfare, the environment, and our health, as well as being an issue that's about as complex as they come, because we need to try and understand not only the issues themselves, but our conflicting motivations, our intentions, our influences that lead to our choices. And so why do we make the food choices that we do in relation to the animals that we eat or the animals that we choose not to eat? And if we accept that we understand the impact of our choices on animals and on the environment and on health, why do we still make those choices? And one thing that we should consider when we make those choices and how we perceive them is that human behavior or human nature is very good at switching off our minds to things that make us uncomfortable and allow us to justify our actions. It's something called confirmation bias, and it's our ability to look for evidence that supports the actions or the choices that we make, whilst trying to dismiss, ignore, or distance ourselves, or holding less weight to the things that disagree with our choices. And we all do it. We don't want animals to suffer, and we rather they didn't, and we want them to have good welfare and lives worth living, but we still want to eat. So we all make compromises and choices. And there's many contributing factors like your upbringing or the shared values of the culture or the people around you, the availability of the choices that you actually have, and each person, each individual's desire or willingness to maybe push a little bit further and make a choice that perhaps they wouldn't have made a year ago or 5 years ago. And every person picks their own path and they decide where they're comfortable with for now. But then as we change our behaviors, we'll take these little steps and make little bargains and make little compromises. And these bargains and compromises and choices all depend on a huge range of factors. And like I said, they're different for everyone. And so just take a moment, each one of you in the rooms where you are, take a second and ask yourself, why have you made the food choices that you made? Think about the last meal that you ate, or the last dinner that you had with family, or the last time you went out and bought food to make a meal, to go shopping for food. Did you make those choices based on the taste of the food, something you like? Or did you choose it or eat it because it's traditional? You didn't even really think about it. It was a traditional meal and you just tend to eat it. Was cost a factor? Was the availability a factor? And while you were eating or buying this food, were you considering the animal welfare impact, the health and well-being, the environmental impact? Did you make a choice with any of those things in mind? Did you choose food that was more environmentally friendly or that was perhaps healthier for you? These are all things that we have to think about, and the why we do these things is different for everyone, as I said. And the process that we work through when we ask ourselves these questions, even subconsciously, is going to be unique. And the thing about food and the act of eating and sharing meals with family and friends is it's something that's really tied up with our memories and our lives and our stories. You think about smelling some food and it will spark a memory of a family occasion, good or bad. And so food is a very powerful thing. And so when we are making choices in relation to the choice of food that we have, those factors are very important. They're hard to push aside. But the welfare of animals is dependent, and the environment is dependent on our ability to do just that. And so this is a nice little illustration. I like this very much. It was created by a colleague of mine called Trent Gracian, who is a colleague at Human Behavior Change for Animals. And this is an illustration of how we make decisions, or can make decisions. The three stones at the bottom are the foundation: time, money, and knowledge, or putting it another way, capacity, opportunity, and motivation. And these three things have to be there. They're the foundation. Every choice that you make, you have to have the time to make the decision, you have to have the money or the capacity to make it, and you have to have the knowledge. You have to understand what's at stake to make that decision. And if those three things aren't there, then it's going to be very difficult to make any kind of decision. But if we assume that that foundation is there, then the other stones on top all fluctuate, and they all have a greater or lesser importance depending on the choice. If we take food choices again, say you're going out to a restaurant with a group of friends. The three foundations are there. You know where you're going, you have the time to do it, and you have the money to afford what you're going to buy. But it's a social environment. And so are you going to be influenced to what you eat by the people around you, or what's available on the menu? How convenient is it? Are you going to make a healthy option tonight because you're on a diet, or you've decided to eat more healthily or ethically? Or is the social environment going to have an impact on what you do? All of these things go in and out of our choices. And in every situation, we are going to add more or weight to these different stones, and the stones are going to be larger or smaller depending on what we decide to do. And this happens every time. And it's not like we freeze every time we have to make a choice and go through this list one by one and go, my identity today suggests that I should make a choice here. That's not how it works. These are all subconscious things. But we always look for shortcuts. It's like when you're at a restaurant and you look over and ask somebody else, well, what are you going to have? Because it's easier sometimes to offload that choice to somebody else, or look at a dish on somebody else's table and go, oh, that looks nice, I'll have that. Because sometimes it's complicated to make these choices, so we look for shortcuts. And that's just one perspective of our thought process. But here's another illustration that I'm going to run through, because for me, I really like how this illustrates people's behaviors and how they're influenced and how they can be changed. And we're talking about the path, the rider, the elephant, and the path. Now, the rider and the elephant is us, and the path is the world around us. And so I'm going to explore those just for the next couple of minutes so that you can understand. So the rider is our rational side. It's the part of us that justifies and rationalizes our choices and decisions. It's our thought process. It's the part of us that likes to think that we're in control. It likes facts and science and evidence and statistics. It knows animals suffer. The rider knows animals suffer, and he knows that his choices impact the welfare of those animals. So how do we direct the rider? How do we get behaviors to change when we're talking about the rider? Well, because he uses information, he likes to make informed decisions. And so things like education, public awareness campaigns speak to the rider in all of us. In this picture, you have some kids there just gone to get their dog vaccinated against rabies, and you can see the flyer that they're holding up. This is a very informative situation. They know about rabies, they know about the cure. So this is speaking to the rider. And of course, this works to a point, because the rider, as I said, often thinks he's in control, but he can easily lose control because he's on an elephant. And the elephant is our emotional side. It's the part of us that wants to do things or doesn't want to do things. And it's the part of us that needs motivating with more than just rational reason and facts and statistics. Sometimes it's happy to be told what to do, but it's a slave to those deep-rooted things like how we feel, what makes us happy and sad, motivated or unmotivated. And when those things take hold, the rider just has to kind of sit there and hold on. So if we're going to change the elephant, we need to motivate it. And this emotional side can work for or against animal welfare. For example, the emotions associated with what you eat or wanting to provide for your families are very strong, but then so is our empathy and our compassion for animals, especially when we're aware of the suffering that our choices can cause. And it's something that does happen a lot in regard to the relationship between the rider and the elephant. Sometimes the elephant falls back on the rider to self-justify a choice after it's been made. And let me just quickly explain what I mean by that. If you used to smoke, or if you know anybody that used to smoke, if you ask them why did they quit smoking, they're going to say, because it's bad for me. The chances are they're going to say, because I know it's bad for me. The thing is, they knew it was bad for them while they were smoking. They didn't suddenly pick up a packet of cigarettes and realize, oh my goodness, I never saw this label about cancer before. It's something that you fall back on afterwards, because the reason that you quit smoking was probably just because something happened or you felt a certain way about it. But we have a tendency to fall back on information to justify after the fact. And that's where the elephant and the rider work together very effectively, and why you can't just speak to one, you have to speak to both. But then lastly, we have the path that we're on. That's our environment and our situation and the influence of others. And it's the part of us that is shaped by the world and the people around us. And the flatter and smoother it is, the easier it is for the rider and the elephant to just trundle along and walk along without thinking about it too much. For food choices, that would mean them not being particularly big or difficult choices. We want them to be normal and mainstream and convenient. And that's why, for example, there's a huge growth in things like meat alternatives and plant-based food right now. The more convenient and easier it is, the easier it is to make that kind of choice. And so when we're talking about how we influence that, how we change behavior by focusing on the path, probably our greatest influence is the influence of other people, families, our partners, our social groups, and our communities. People influence other people in a way that few other things do. And if there's a common understanding of the root cause of a problem within people, then there's an opportunity for people to work together in solving them. But in truth, for people to change behaviors, it's a combination of approaches. And this phrase really sums up the way that human behavior works. Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I truly understand. And if we think about this, this talks about the rider, the elephant, and the path all together. And if you focus on any one, it's a little bit more difficult. But if we focus on all of them and recognize the influences and the importance of all of them, then we stand a much better chance of changing our behaviors and creating a kinder world. Because we need to be conscious of our rider and what he needs in order to inform his choices. We need to understand our elephant and what it feels and the emotions that are related to it and what influences him. And then we need to use our lobbying and buying power and a way in which we interact with people around us to shape the path so it's as wide and animal and environmentally friendly as possible. For people to care, there's a lot of different paths that we can take. And as we move towards this kinder, more compassionate and respectful world, we have to ensure that the welfare of animals and the protection of the environment is present in all of our choices. And in doing that, if we understand human behavior and the way in which we make these choices, then the easier it is for us to be able to do that. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Harry, for that presentation. As I said, I've seen you present many times, well, one online and once in person, and I'm always amazed at at the way that you tap into people's ability to think about their choices and what they do. And I think it's a really powerful message that we all have very powerful ability to have impact on the world around us simply with our individual choices. So it's a great message, and I'm glad you were able to share that with us today. With that, we conclude our two presentations, and we will move on to our Q&A session now, where we have a few questions that have been posted on the Q&A Zoom section here, and we also had some questions that were emailed to us prior to the webinar as well. So I'd like to kick it off with some of the questions that were sent earlier today via email. Let me just kick off with you, Harry, here first. So let me ask you, how can the principles of behavior change and their impact on animal welfare be used in a country like Pakistan?
I often get asked this when I work in different countries, because there's this assumption that there are some key differences. And obviously there are. It would be ridiculous to assume that they're not. Each country has a different cultural environment, religious environment, political environment. And so we have to kind of accept that there are these factors on the outside. But ultimately, when we're talking about what makes us us and how we make our choices, we're still all people, irrespective of whether we're in Pakistan or Peru or the UK or Canada or the United States or anywhere. People are people. And so the principles of human behavior change are sound. The example of the rider, the elephant, and the path exist everywhere. The path, for example, might be slightly different in Pakistan than it is in the UK, but still, we have to understand what that path is and how to navigate around it. And so it's not so much about that there's a problem using human behavior change issues in a country like Pakistan. It's just recognizing where you are and adapting those principles which transcends the differences in places, and just working the best approach. It's about being flexible enough and understanding people.
Thank you, Harry. And a next question we have from Hyderabad, from Sumera Bhatti, and this is for Jessica. Jessica, how are the SDGs monitored, given that the context and situation of each country varies?
Sure, thanks for that question. So yeah, I think that's the way the UN has set up the monitoring is that each country reports its own progress, which has its own benefits and weaknesses. So the benefit is that, you know, the country's own context is obviously something that it can measure itself, and yeah, this way so the context in the national level can be taken into account fully, because it's you know, everyone has the same direction that we're trying to head in with the SDGs. But each country can move as quickly as it can, given its context, and then report on that progress. Obviously, the limitation is that it gives a lot of countries maybe possibly too much leeway to not make progress. So I think that's one of the weaknesses. But yeah, I think because it is a self-reported process, it gives the countries the ability to take into account their own context. And yeah, I think I think that yeah, it's a challenge for sure. I think that you've hit on a nail on the head on I think something that a lot of people discuss within the context of the SDGs is this format of reporting effective, or is it something that needs to be updated in the future to make sure that it's easier to implement the SDGs, or that they're done more effectively implemented. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. I think it's also worth mentioning too that, I mean, as with anything, it's always adaptable, right? And these kind of things change based on the manner in which we see their success or their failure. So it's a very flexible thing, I suspect. Harry, a question for you. Can you provide some examples of how an act of human behavior change can make a big impact on an issue?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at human behavior change in so many different ways. And I remember having a conversation some years ago with a colleague of mine at the International Fund for Animal Welfare, and we were discussing how if you look at it in a certain way, human behavior changes everywhere. Human behavior is everywhere. And like every street that you walk down is human behavior. You know, you're walking down the pavement. Somebody has designed that so that you walk down it. But like right now, outside of animal welfare, for example, think about the situation that we're in right now with COVID and the impact that each one of us with the behavior of wearing a mask potentially has on a huge global scale. This again is an example of human behavior. But if we're talking about an animal welfare perspective, and forgive me, my cat is meowing at the moment, so if you hear some meowing in the background, I apologize. But if you think about human behavior from an animal welfare perspective, a really nice example is working equines, and somewhere the work of the Brook does, which is a wonderful organization that works with horses and mules and donkeys around the world, and have many projects in Pakistan. But human behavior has a huge impact there because they're working with communities that, for example, have information passed down generationally. You have families that treat their animals in a certain way because their father did it, because their grandfather did it, because their great-grandfather did it. And so when you have a human behavior change that affects a community like that and can influence that, then the ripples of that can be huge because then that can get passed down generationally. And these impacts can be one person then affects their children or their family or their community. And the ripples of this move outwards. And so human behavior change can be quite significant even when you don't realize the impact that it's actually going to have.
Thanks, Harry. So Jessica, a question for you. I don't see it was from the head office. I'm not sure who posed this question, someone from the head office. Maybe this is my opinion, but I feel the more sustainable development goals are introduced and the more hunger, poverty, pollution, and hatred is increased, what is the reason behind all this? Did it exist before, or has it increased because people are gaining awareness about their rights and they try to snatch their rights and not aware to keep balance? So I think the question here is, do these issues arise as a result of increased awareness about the SDGs and about these issues? Are they pre-existing?
I think that's a really interesting question. So a lot of these problems that the SDGs attempt to address are really difficult issues that are really ingrained in a lot of countries and globally, that they've been on a trajectory in a certain direction for a very long time. And so the SDGs are still fairly new, even though it's been 5 years and it seems like, you know, things should be, we're a third of the way there to 2030, so things should be a third of the way fixed. But in reality, yeah, these are trajectories that are really difficult to turn around. And so I think the SDGs are important because they do raise the awareness about these issues and that there are trajectories that are problematic and that we need to begin turning this around. So I think on the one hand, it definitely is the fact that awareness is continually growing about some of these problems. On the other hand, unfortunately, there is data, for example, with food security to show that food security is actually decreasing, which it was increasing for a number of years and now has turned around. So there are some unfortunate trends that really are there, but I think, yeah, that there is also growing awareness, which is good because once we're aware of the problem, we can design ways to change our behavior to fix them. So yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Harry, question for you. Can you kindly suggest some strategies for not destroying the forests? As you mentioned, around 42 million deforestation, there are around 42 million forests deforested every year.
Yeah, 42 million acres of forest every year. this is one of those tough questions, isn't it? Because we're talking about things on a global scale. You know, these are forests that are in the Amazon or in Southeast Asia or anywhere. And the question could be, how do we as individuals affect that change? And we're talking about forests here, but we could be talking about any of these enormous issues that affect us all, whether it be factory farming or anything like that, wildlife trade. And the answer is that there are two sides to this. We as individuals all bear a responsibility. We can't affect big change as an individual, but collaboratively we can. There's I remember seeing something recently about plastic straws, and it's like, well, it's just one plastic straw, said 8 billion people. And so the cumulative effect of our actions can have a big impact. And it's easy to put that aside and go, yeah, but it's not really going to make that much difference. But enough people do it, it does. And so we have, for deforestation, an opportunity to make choices. We know that a great deal of deforestation is as a result of growing palm oil or growing soybeans that are to feed animals rather than people. And so the choices that we make and the impact that we have as individuals can have an influence, because our buying choices do have influence over companies. If we choose different things, then there is going to be a market for them, and they can have less of an environmental impact, and then can have less of an impact and cause deforestation. But then there's the other side of it, the people that make the decisions. So we're talking about the companies, but also we need to be supporting governments. We need to be lobbying for change, because it's the governments that ultimately are going to bring in legislation and hopefully enforce it to reduce deforestation. And so again, this is where we as a community in a country or through non-profit organizations or through local government can influence and make that change. And it's not like it doesn't happen. It's not like, well, you know, this is never going to happen, because it does happen. You have places like Costa Rica and other countries that have implemented enormous changes and completely stopped the issue of deforestation and damaging ecosystems. So the models are there. It's just whether or not we can find the right way of influencing. But it's daunting, you know, each of us is one person, and sometimes it feels incredibly overwhelming. But there are things that we can all do.
Thanks, Harry. Jessica, there's two questions here, and I'll kind of combine them. They're lengthy, but I think they're asking the same thing. So one, are UN member countries bound to make progress on SDGs, or are they free to act as they like? And second is, why do the SDGs expire in 2030?
Great. So yeah, in terms of the SDGs and how countries are bound to implement them, they really set the goals for countries to try to reach, but they don't dictate how countries achieve that. So they leave it to countries to design their own solutions that are, specific to their context. And why they expire in 2030, I think primarily this is because they need a reasonable amount of time to actually accomplish and make progress on the goals. And then, of course, after a certain amount of time, they will become kind of maybe outdated. And so they need to be updated to make sure that they're taking account of major global problems. So I saw that there was also a question about how the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were different. And I just had gone back and reminded myself a bit about the MDGs, and they're very specific. And like, when I look at them now, I can see that the problems that they were seeking to address from 2000 to 2015 are maybe too specific or not totally relevant to the problems we're facing today. So that's why the time frame is about 15 years, so we can implement some positive changes in the problems we're facing, but make sure that we're adapting to what problems the world is facing. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessica. Harry, a question from the regional office from Mr. Akib. I would like to ask Harry, a dog specifically is a sign of love and is treated nicely in the Western world, but in this part of the world, keeping in view religious sentiments, a dog is not preferred to be kept as a pet or loved in general. How do you cope with this school of thought? Isn't this quite challenging?
The short answer is yes. It is very challenging. Yes, I mean, there's no doubt that different parts of the world, dogs are seen differently. Yes, in the West, they're predominantly companions. In other countries, they are part of the fabric of everyday life. They're just on the street and they live alongside people. And then in other countries, they're really not liked and they're not particularly tolerated. They're seen as a nuisance, or they're just kind of ignored because they're just background noise. And so, yes, it's hugely challenging. And it's somewhere like Pakistan, for example, where dogs are not just a nuisance, but they present a threat of rabies, which is significant. Then you have to look at it in a very different way. And so when we talk about dogs specifically, a lot of my work is to do with dog population management in countries that in many ways are similar to Pakistan. I've worked with countries in the Middle East where, again, the view of dogs is tolerant, but you know, it's kind of, they're not pets. They don't live in our house. And so when you look at that, what you have to understand is that you work in each different community. I'm not even just talking about a country or a municipality wide. You have to look at different communities and see what they feel about those dogs. And you have to understand the dynamics of a population with dogs. But the bottom line is the best way of controlling dogs is to control the population, and that's through sterilization and vaccination programs that reduce the numbers, control the numbers, reduce the conflict between people and dogs, so that it doesn't really become an issue. So that even if you don't particularly like dogs, they're not really a bother. They're not going to chase your children on the way to school. They're not going to give you rabies. They're not going to cause a nuisance. They're just there. And so ultimately in communities where pet ownership isn't a particularly big thing, that's what we're trying to attain. And it's a long process. And we're talking about sustainability goals. That's ultimately a sustainability goal because it's not something that's going to happen in a year or even 5 years. But ultimately, those kinds of projects, that's what they're aiming for, recognizing what dogs represent in each different place.
Thank you for that question, whoever asked that, because I do think it's a very relevant question to Pakistan, but not just to Pakistan, but to many countries where dogs are not, as you said, seen as a loving animal, but do exist in the communities. So it is a very relevant issue. So Jessica, can you provide some significant examples of countries where some SDG goals have been achieved completely or nearly, and how?
So this is a challenging question for sure. Yeah, so I think in general, a lot of countries are still getting started with, you know, incorporating the SDGs into their national policies in ways that can, yeah, be meaningfully measured and begin to have an impact. That's just the nature of these policy frameworks. So I think if you're interested in specific countries, then you can go to the UN website, and each country that's given a report in the past years will have lots of examples in those reports on how they see the SDGs being implemented in their countries. I think what's more powerful probably is to look at what a lot of the civil society and non-governmental organizations are doing. And for example, projects like the one that you are embarking on with Caring for Life education, I think it really comes down to the programs that these types of organizations are doing on the ground, at least especially in this time frame when the SDGs are still fairly new, to be changing behavior and attitudes in communities and helping communities identify solutions to the problems they face. So yeah, I think it really, right now, I would say the most work is being implemented by NGOs and yeah, the projects that they're carrying out on the ground.
And you know, there was another question that asked, and I think you just answered it, Jessica, about how we specifically connect CFL to the SDGs, and I think you addressed that, in that we've, you know, simply by having CFL in practice on the ground is in essence work towards accomplishing the SDGs. Yeah.
Exactly.
Harry, what do you suggest is the simplest thing a human being can do to change their behavior towards not ignoring animals?
That's a great question. This again kind of goes back to that feeling of helplessness. You know, we talk about these big issues of cruelty and animals here and situations there. And it's very much about what can we as individuals do. And I'm really I'm a really firm believer of, I don't like this all or nothing attitude. It's like, if you don't do everything, then you shouldn't do anything. And I totally disagree with that. It's not necessarily about, if we talk about food choices, it's not necessarily about becoming vegan. If that's what you choose to do, then that's wonderful, because that can have an impact. But every meal that you choose to eat that doesn't contain animal is improving the welfare of animals by that simple choice. Looking at the labels of things, and choosing a product that doesn't have palm oil in it over one that does, or choosing something that is locally sourced and is sustainable as opposed to something that is industrially produced. All of those choices can have an impact, and cumulatively together they can have an enormous impact. But it's also about letting yourself off the hook sometimes. We can't be perfect. Nobody's perfect. We're always aspiring to do better. And as long as we keep in mind the welfare of animals and the environment in the choices that we make, then we try and make the best decisions that we can, and just look for those opportunities where you can, where you are able to. And if you're finding yourself in a situation where those choices aren't available, then look at ways that maybe you can influence them. I guess it's not the same in different countries, but I'm going to use an example in the UK. If you go into a supermarket and they don't stock a particular kind of product, animal friendly or otherwise, if enough people ask for it, they're going to start stocking it. And in the UK, some supermarkets, that number is as low as 10 people asking within the course of a month. And so if there's something that you want to see change, sometimes it's not just about you making that change, but it's about speaking to other people and building that collection of influence. But us as individuals, it's about just deciding what choice we want to make every day, and being considerate, being compassionate, making a kinder, more compassionate choice where we can.
Thanks, Harry. Jessica, a question for you. We're very hopeful with the presented SDGs. Being a change agent in my school, how can I educate or motivate my students to achieve this kind of positive attitude towards these SDGs?
So that's a great question. So I think, yeah, that's, I think what's so powerful about the caring for life education is that as you help your students understand, or your colleagues at school, I'm not sure if the person who asked the question is a teacher, right? A teacher trainer? Yes. Okay, great. Then yeah, so as you work with your students, and you're going to be helping them to see new connections between the environment, animals, and humans, and hopefully enlightening that their questions in these, you know, issues, and helping them to see how they can identify solutions and look at these issues empathetically. So I think, yeah, the work that you're doing through Caring for Life is really important to that. And I think what Harry's been discussing in terms of behavior change is really critical, and that's not something that I'm quite as familiar with, but I think, yeah, taking into account what Harry's been mentioning is probably the most powerful way to address that. And I just wanted to go back to the last question with the examples, and I wonder if it's okay if I put a link in the chat box So there is a coalition that I work with of mostly animal and non-governmental organizations, and we've put together a little booklet that has case studies on different SDGs. So I think if you look in here, then you'll find a lot of interesting examples that will probably answer your question a bit better in terms of examples of how the SDGs are being implemented around the world. So yeah.
The chat feature is not active on this webinar, Jessica, but if you send
Okay.
that to me, I'll share with all of the panelists.
Okay, great.
So I'll ask a couple more individual questions, and then after that, I'd like to pose some questions that either of you could answer. Harry, this is, I'm sure you've been faced with this question before. Apart from hunting or killing animals for other uses, there's also farm production of animals for food. Why should I change my choice of taste, and why should we cease our desires?
It's a good question. And I'm not one of these people that is they're forcing people to change their choices. People, for whatever reason, love the food that they love, or an environment where those food choices are present and important to them. But if we're talking about the impact that we have, then we have to be conscious of the impact that our choices actually cause. By eating meat that is factory farmed, we are causing cruelty to animals. There's no way of disguising that. It might be an uncomfortable truth, but by choosing food that is produced in a certain way, we are complicit in the treatment of those animals. If we are eating food that is factory farmed, again, we are contributing to environmental concerns. And so it's not to say that you should choose to eat meat one way or the other. And I'm not saying, there's a wonderful quote that I particularly like by a writer called Jonathan Safran Foer. And he wrote a book called Eating Animals. And he said, if we try and convince half the world to become vegetarian, we are going to fail miserably. But if we try and convince the world that half of the meals that they eat could be vegetarian, then there's a very big chance of success. And for the animals, it doesn't make any difference. So for me, it's very much about just making choices. Not every meal has to be a meat meal. If you love the taste of meat, I'm not saying give it up. Just cut down, find alternatives. Because if everybody does that, then the change that we can see is significant. And now we're at a turning point in food production, because we have so many plant-based alternatives, and now we're having cell-based meat. So it's not even like it's a plant-based alternative. It's meat that's going to be grown in a lab that is going to be as cheap and freely available as factory farmed meat. We are probably just a few years away from that being available. And the impact that just choosing those over the meat that you would normally choose has a significant impact. So it's about making choices now, but also realizing that within the next few years, the choices are going to be so much easier for us all.
Thank you, Harry. I'm going to pose one last question. I apologize if we didn't get to everyone's question. There were so many great ones and limited time. So I've just scrolled through the list here and found one that I think could be relevant to both of you. Let me ask this. Do you think humane education should be taught to government officials and stakeholders, and then to schools? Because without the help of these officials, individuals face many difficulties and don't or won't take action. So can both of you speak to that with your relevant topics? Do you want to start, Jessica?
Sure. Yeah, I think that humane education is certainly something that shouldn't just be constrained to younger learners. I think everyone will hopefully strive to be lifelong learners, and that it's really important that children see also the values that they're being taught being also practiced by the adults around them, and especially leaders in their communities. So I think, yeah, it's really important that humane education extends beyond the classroom into learners of all ages. I think practically it can be challenging to figure ways to continue that education for adults. But yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree with Jessica there. It's that she's absolutely right. Lifelong learning is an important thing, and it's something that we all do. I think the only difference is in the way in which it is, for want of a better word, taught. The way it's presented, the way that people in government or at any age can access that information, obviously is going to be different whether you're an adult or whether you're a child. But yes, absolutely. I think it's very important that everybody has access to that.
So thank you everyone for your fantastic questions. There were so many, and I'm so sorry that we weren't able to get to more of those, but I'm mindful of the fact that we're in some different time zones and people do, some people are at the end of their day right now. So with that, we'll close off the Q&A. I really want to specifically say thank you to Harry and Jessica for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us and share some information with us all and educate us all on your relevant issues. Jessica, I know it's incredibly early where you are in the US right now, so thank you for waking up at an ungodly hour to join us. That's very kind of you. I hope that everyone who attended today as a guest found the information useful. I hope that all of our master trainers found the information not only useful from an individual standpoint, but helpful to supplement your training with the Caring for Life program, such that you're able to share this information with the teachers in the schools when we conduct that teacher training. If you would like to learn more about Harry and Jessica's organizations and the work that they do, Jessica is with the World Animal Net, and if you want to learn more information about that, you can go to worldanimal.net. And if you'd like to learn more about Harry's organization, Change for Animals Foundation, you can go to changeforanimals.org. I really want to also thank all the master trainers for being here. Truly, without all of you delivering this program and sharing this information in schools and with the educators in the Sindh province, we would be nowhere with this program without you. So I hope that during the course of this webinar series and during the webinar today, you have started to get a taste of, or a very small idea about the great impact that you have and the possibilities that you have to share this information. So thank you so much for your contribution and for being here with us. You don't see her here today, but I want to specifically say thank you to Joylini as well, who has been completely instrumental in helping to put these webinars together. So I know she's listening. Thank you, Joy, for everything that you do. If you'd like to learn more about our partners, SEF, you can go to sef.org.pk to learn more about the work that they do. And on behalf of us here at Join Hands, if you'd like to learn more about our work, you can go to joinhands.org. So thank you for being here for our webinar today. Our next webinar is next month on December 8th, and we'll be joined by Michael Kaufman from Green Chimneys and by Nikunj Sharma from the India Office of Mercy for Animals. So we're looking forward to that webinar in December. Stay safe, stay healthy. I hope everyone has a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And we will see you next month. Take care, everyone.